On the morning of October 4th, 2024, in a quiet apartment in Seabrook, Texas, the body of 23-year-old Mary Jayne Collins was found. She was a young mother of two, trying to move on from her past, unaware that her new boyfriend wasn't who he claimed to be. What seemed like a domestic dispute turned out to be something far more sinister. According to investigators, the man she trusted with her life and her children's dated her with one goal in mind: revenge. His name was Darland Ernest Hurst, a 22-year-old who had carefully inserted himself into Mary's life with the intention of making her suffer for something she had nothing to do with. Mary's only crime was having children with Michael King, a man currently in prison for the 2020 shooting death of Hurst's half-brother, Jayne Triplet. Hurst waited. He gained her trust. He moved into her apartment. He even bonded with her children. But all along, he was plotting the perfect moment for his revenge. And then, just days before the murder, Hurst forced Mary's 4-year-old child to mock her ex on a FaceTime jail call, saying, "Look what I'm doing to your kids." He slapped the child. He taunted the father. Mary could be heard in the background, begging and crying, pleading for Hurst to stop. Hours later, she was dead, beaten, stabbed, left lifeless in her own home, while her two small children watched.
Motive in the murder of a Seabrook mother in front of her children.
As police continue the search for the suspect, we're learning they believe he killed the victim to avenge his brother's murder.
ABC 13's Jessica Willey is here to break down the stunning revelation, all new at 10.
Seabrook police believe the murder of Mary Jayne Collins on October 4th is linked to a man's murder 4 years ago, and that her accused killer, who is wanted tonight, got close to her ultimately in order to retaliate. Tonight, her family wants justice. They say she didn't deserve this. She was the mother of 2 children.
This wasn't just a case of domestic violence. This was a revenge killing cloaked in manipulation, deception, and cold-blooded strategy. So, how did this happen? What was Mary's story? Why didn't anyone intervene? And most importantly, could this murder have been stopped? Stay with us as we break down the full timeline, the disturbing motive, and the unfolding investigation that exposed one of the most calculated crimes Texas has seen in years. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Who was Mary Jayne Collins? Before the headlines, before the murder, before the police tape surrounded her apartment, Mary Jayne Collins was simply a 23-year-old woman trying to survive in Seabrook, Texas. She lived a quiet, mostly private life centered around one thing: her children. She had 2 young children under the age of 5. Their names are withheld for privacy, but they were often seen by neighbors playing in front of her apartment or riding in the backseat of her car on grocery runs. Mary didn't have a flashy social media presence or a long list of friends. She kept her circle small and remained focused on her responsibilities as a mother. According to her relatives, Mary was known for being sweet, reserved, and especially protective of her kids. She didn't go out often. She didn't post frequently. Most of her time was spent between home, errands, and activities that involved her children. When she did interact with neighbors, they described her as soft-spoken and polite, not confrontational, not someone who drew attention to herself. Mary Jayne's life changed significantly when she began a relationship with Michael King. He would later become the father of her children. That relationship was marked by turbulence and would eventually be tied to deadly consequences. Michael King was not a stranger to violence. In 2020, he was convicted for the shooting death of a man named Jayne Triplet. That name would later become central in Mary's murder case, but at the time, it was another incident in a long line of violent disputes in the Houston area. After King's incarceration, Mary remained the primary guardian of their children. She appeared to maintain limited contact with King while raising their kids on her own. After King's imprisonment, Mary continued to live in Seabrook. She didn't move out of state or disappear. She stayed local and tried to rebuild. Around this time, she began a new relationship, this time with 22-year-old Dawland Ernest Hurst. What Mary did not know was that Hurst was a half-brother of Dijuan Triplett, the same man her ex, Michael King, had shot and killed in 2020. Whether Mary was aware of that connection when the relationship began remains unclear. What is clear is that Hurst knew exactly who she was and who her children belonged to. Investigators now believe that this relationship was never built on affection or trust. It was part of a long-planned act of retaliation. Over time, Mary allowed Hurst into her home and around her children. Friends noted that the relationship moved fast. He began staying over frequently and eventually lived with her. During this period, neighbors and close associates began to notice concerning details. Visible bruises on Mary's arms, what looked like bite marks on her neck, and her increasing isolation. Despite these signs, Mary continued to assure friends and family that she was okay. She did not file any police reports. No restraining orders were requested. She did not seek help from domestic violence shelters or advocacy groups. This pattern, visible signs of harm paired with verbal reassurances, is common in many abuse cases. In Mary's case, those warnings would be dismissed until it was too late. In the final weeks before her death, the signs became more frequent. One friend reportedly saw Mary with a bandage on her arm and asked about it. Mary reportedly changed the subject. Another neighbor said she once overheard loud arguments, but didn't feel it was her place to intervene. By the time police discovered Mary Jayne Collins' body in her apartment on October 4th, 2024, it was clear that a prolonged pattern of abuse had occurred. The crime scene suggested a brutal and premeditated attack. Evidence gathered later would show that Hurst had not only abused her physically in private, but had also humiliated her during a FaceTime jail call involving her incarcerated ex, forcing her 4-year-old son to taunt his own father, while Mary could be heard crying and pleading in the background. Mary's children were present in the home at the time of the murder. They were not harmed but witnessed the crime. Police later removed them from the scene and placed them under the care of extended family. The full picture of who Mary Jayne Collins was only became public after her death. She was not a public figure. She was not wealthy. She was not controversial. She was a young woman in a private struggle, making quiet decisions that would ultimately intersect with dangerous vendetta. Mary's life was taken not because of something she did, but because of the man she was. Mary Jayne Collins met Dawland Ernest Hurst in early 2024, several months before her murder. At the time, she was a single mother of 2 young children, residing in Seabrook, Texas. Sources close to the investigation state that the two were introduced through mutual friends on social media. Hurst initiated contact and was described as charismatic and attentive during the early stages of their communication. Within weeks, the relationship escalated quickly. Hurst visited her frequently, spent time with her children, and eventually moved into her apartment. The timeline from their first meeting to cohabitation was short, estimated at less than 2 months. Friends reported that Mary appeared to trust Hurst fully, even allowing him access to personal aspects of her life, including parenting responsibilities and financial matters. However, those close to Mary began to notice red flags. Several of her friends and neighbors observed that Mary started to show signs of physical distress shortly after Hurst moved in. She had visible bite marks on her arms and unexplained bruises on her face and legs. When asked about them, she often downplayed the injuries or gave vague explanations. Her routine also changed drastically. She became more isolated, stopped responding to calls and messages from close friends, and appeared anxious during brief conversations. One neighbor told investigators that loud arguments and unsettling noises were frequently heard from the apartment at night. Another neighbor observed Hurst yelling at Mary in the parking lot on more than one occasion. Despite these signs, no formal report was made to law enforcement regarding domestic abuse. Mary's family noticed that she appeared distant and subdued in recent video calls. They urged her to leave the relationship, but she insisted everything was under control. What no one realized at the time was that Hurst was never in the relationship for love or companionship. He had a different purpose, and Mary was unaware that she had become the central figure in a personal vendetta. To understand Hearst's motive, it is necessary to examine the background of Dijuan Triplett, Hearst's half-brother. In 2020, Triplett was shot and killed in Houston, Texas. The individual charged in his death was Michael King, who was Mary Jayne Collins' ex-partner and the biological father of her children. King was later convicted and sentenced to prison for his role in Triplett's death. The incident created animosity between the families involved, and Hearst believed that his brother's murder was not just a criminal act, but a personal betrayal that required retaliation. While Michael King was serving his sentence, Hearst began to harbor a long-term grudge. His focus shifted toward Mary, who was not involved in the crime but was connected to King through their children. Hearst viewed her as a symbolic extension of the man who killed his brother. According to investigators, Hearst developed a strategy to reach King emotionally from behind bars by targeting someone close to him. Reports show that Hearst used a romantic relationship as a cover to gain access to Mary's life and her children. His objective was not only to harm Mary physically, but also to psychologically impact Michael King by involving the children in acts of humiliation and violence. On October 4th, 2024, Hearst forced Mary's 4-year-old son to participate in a FaceTime jail call to King. During the call, he made the child say things that were intended to taunt the incarcerated father, such as, "Look what I'm doing to your kids." This event was captured on a prison contraband phone and circulated within investigative circles during the case. Hours after the call, Hearst carried out the attack on Mary. He beat and stabbed her in her apartment. Her 2 children were present during the incident. Investigators concluded that this was a premeditated act tied directly to Hearst's anger over his brother's death and his calculated effort to make King suffer in prison. The connection between the 3 individuals, Mary Jayne Collins, Michael King, and Dijuan Hearst, formed a triangle of tragedy. Mary was not involved in the 2020 killing, but her proximity to the perpetrator made her a target. Hearst never confronted King directly. Instead, he exploited Mary's trust and executed his plan under the false guise of a romantic relationship. This section of the investigation confirmed that the motive for the murder was not rooted in a spontaneous argument or emotional outburst. It was driven by a personal agenda of revenge that had been forming for years. On the morning of October 4th, 2024, at approximately 9 a.m., events inside a Seabrook, Texas apartment took a chilling turn. At the center of it all was 23-year-old Mary Jayne Collins, her live-in boyfriend Dijuan Ernest Hearst, and a FaceTime jail call that would expose a calculated motive. According to investigators, Hearst initiated a FaceTime video call with Michael King, who was incarcerated at the time. King was the biological father of Mary's 2 children and the man convicted in 2020 for the fatal shooting of Hearst's half-brother, Dijuan Triplett. The call was made using a smuggled cell phone inside the prison, an illegal device that would later serve as key evidence in the murder case. During the video call, Hearst positioned one of Mary's young children, believed to be her 4-year-old son, in front of the screen. What happened next was disturbing. Hearst instructed the child to mock his own father, telling him, "Look what I'm doing to your kids." Investigators say the child appeared scared and reluctant, but followed Hearst's directions under pressure. The background audio of the video revealed Mary's voice, clearly distressed. She was pleading with Hearst to stop, crying and begging as the incident unfolded. Authorities confirmed that Mary's voice was consistent with prior recordings, and her tone indicated panic and helplessness. She was reportedly held back or physically threatened during the interaction. The entire exchange was captured on a legal prison device and later recovered by corrections officers during a contraband sweep. The call lasted several minutes, long enough to show evidence of child abuse, psychological manipulation, and premeditated humiliation aimed at the incarcerated father. According to sources, the timing and nature of the call strongly support the theory that this interaction was part of a revenge strategy, not a random outburst. After the call ended, a timeline of violent escalation began. Authorities believe that shortly after the FaceTime incident, likely between 9:15 and 9:45 a.m., Hearst attacked Mary inside the apartment. The medical examiner's report later confirmed that she had multiple blunt force injuries to her head and upper body, as well as stab wounds that contributed to her death. The precise weapon has not been disclosed publicly, but police describe it as a blunt and sharp dual-use object. Eyewitnesses to the crime were Mary's own children, ages 4 and 3, who were reportedly present in the room or nearby when the violence occurred. One of the children later described to a relative that Mommy was on the floor and he hit her. Law enforcement officials used these statements to reconstruct part of the crime timeline and verify the sequence of events. At approximately 10:15 a.m., neighbors reported hearing a child crying uncontrollably. By 11 a.m., a concerned relative who hadn't heard from Mary arrived at the apartment. Upon entering, they found Mary unresponsive and called 911. Emergency services pronounced her dead at the scene. The children were found physically unharmed, but visibly traumatized, and were immediately taken into protective custody. Police arrived and began their investigation. Hearst was not at the scene when authorities arrived. A manhunt was launched, and over the course of 3 weeks, Hearst was tracked through digital footprints, social media activity, and phone records. On October 28, 2024, he was located and arrested without incident. Investigators later tied the murder directly to the jail call. They cited the timing, the intentional child involvement, and the victim's audible distress as proof that the murder was not spontaneous, but premeditated. The district attorney's office charged Hearst with first-degree murder, injury to a child, and evidence tampering related to the illegal recording and destruction attempts. Authorities have not released the children's names, and their current location remains confidential for their safety. Family members have since spoken out, saying that the children are undergoing counseling and will remain under protective supervision for the foreseeable future. Can a person be both a loving partner and a calculated killer? Hearst lived with Mary. He smiled in photos. He took the kids to the park. But behind the scenes, he was allegedly orchestrating a violent act of revenge. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Could anyone have predicted this outcome? The murder of 23-year-old Mary Jayne Collins in her Seabrook, Texas apartment on October 4th, 2024, triggered an immediate investigation. Responding officers found her body inside the apartment, along with her 2 young children, visibly shaken but physically unharmed. The children had reportedly witnessed the crime. Initial evidence collected at the scene included visible signs of struggle, broken objects, and blood trails leading from the living room into the kitchen. The cause of death was later determined to be a combination of blunt force trauma and stab wounds. A weapon was not recovered at the scene. Detectives launched a 3-week investigation that relied heavily on digital surveillance, phone data analysis, and witness interviews. Investigators focused early on Dawland Ernest Hearst, Mary's live-in boyfriend at the time. Neighbors confirmed he had been staying in the apartment in the weeks leading up to her death. Surveillance footage from nearby residential cameras placed Hearst near the apartment complex around the time of the murder. He was also seen leaving the area shortly after midnight, walking briskly and carrying what appeared to be a backpack. Police believe he fled the scene following the attack. Phone data from Hearst's device was recovered using a warrant. Investigators discovered multiple deleted messages, along with evidence that he had FaceTimed Mary's incarcerated ex-partner, Michael King, just hours before the murder. That call was made using an illegal cell phone inside the prison. In that video call, Hearst reportedly forced Mary's 4-year-old son to mock his own father, saying, "Look what I'm doing to your kids." Witnesses could hear Mary crying and pleading in the background. This incident was recorded by prison staff and flagged as suspicious, prompting cross-agency collaboration. Authorities also obtained statements from witnesses, including neighbors who reported hearing arguing and loud banging sounds in the early hours of October 4th. One neighbor told police they heard a child screaming followed by a woman shouting, "Please stop," multiple times before silence. Investigators confirmed that Mary had suffered prior injuries weeks before the incident, including visible bite marks and bruising, which were documented by friends and coworkers. However, no official domestic violence reports were filed by Mary. After 3 weeks of surveillance and analysis, the Houston Police Department located Hearst hiding in a relative's home in Galveston County. He was arrested on October 28, 2024, without incident. Following his arrest, Hearst was charged with the following: first-degree homicide, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, domestic violence involving bodily injury, endangering the welfare of a child. He was denied bond and transferred to the Harris County Jail. In early court proceedings, prosecutors alleged that Hurst entered into a relationship with Mary Jayne Collins solely to get revenge on her ex-partner, Michael King, who was responsible for the 2020 shooting death of Hurst's half-brother, Diajuan Triplett. According to the state, Hurst used Mary as a pawn in a calculated effort to emotionally hurt King by attacking the mother of his children and traumatizing the children themselves. Prosecutors also introduced preliminary digital evidence, including extracted messages from Hurst's phone that referenced payback, and making him feel the pain I felt. The state alleged that Hurst had been planning the crime for weeks and deliberately avoided detection by isolating Mary from her social circle and deleting conversations. During the arraignment, Hurst entered a plea of not guilty. His defense attorney argued that the prosecution's narrative was built on circumstantial evidence and speculation, and claimed that the FaceTime call and surveillance footage did not conclusively place Hurst at the crime scene during the time of death. The court scheduled a pre-trial hearing for January 2025. Prosecutors stated they planned to introduce video evidence from a FaceTime call, cell tower location data, and testimonies from forensic experts to build their case. In response to the case, Mary's family released a statement through their attorney, expressing frustration that signs of domestic abuse were overlooked. They stated, "Mary told us she was okay, but we now realize she was hiding a much deeper fear. We want justice for her and safety for her children." Child Protective Services confirmed that Mary's 2 children, who were present during the murder, were placed under the care of maternal relatives. Counseling and trauma support services were arranged for both minors. Court officials noted that the children's psychological recovery will be a key concern in the long-term handling of the case. Legal experts following the case say that the combination of digital evidence, recorded jail communications, and witness statements create a strong case for the prosecution. However, the defense is expected to challenge the timeline and question the admissibility of certain digital evidence obtained from the prison system. The trial is expected to draw regional attention due to the unique revenge motive, the victim's age, and the presence of children during the attack. The murder of Mary Jayne Collins quickly gained regional and national attention. News outlets across Texas, including local stations in Houston, Galveston, and Seabrook, released headlines describing the crime as disturbing, unthinkable, and calculated. Many media reports highlighted the most shocking element: the fact that Mary was killed in front of her 2 children by a man she was dating, who had an undisclosed revenge motive tied to a past shooting. Coverage intensified once details emerged about the FaceTime jail call. According to police reports, just hours before her death, Mary's boyfriend, Dawlan Hurst, forced her 4-year-old son to taunt his incarcerated father, Michael King, during a video call. This was confirmed through an illegally obtained phone recording from inside the prison. The public found this act especially troubling because it indicated long-term planning and psychological abuse, not just physical violence. Many media outlets questioned how Hurst was able to maintain a relationship with Mary despite her visible injuries, which had been seen by friends, neighbors, and possibly medical staff. At least one report noted that Mary had been seen with bite marks on her body, and some speculated that she may have been coerced into staying silent. After Hurst's arrest on October 28, 2024, social media lit up with public anger. Hashtags like #JusticeForMary, #EndDomesticViolence, and #WatchTheSigns began trending. Thousands of people shared posts about domestic abuse, especially cases where the warning signs were ignored or minimized. The story prompted widespread discussion about how revenge killings often go undetected because they're disguised as romantic relationships. Multiple online petitions were launched on platforms like Change.org, demanding better tracking of illegal prison communication devices, stricter background checks for individuals involved in custody or co-parenting disputes, mandatory wellness checks when abuse is suspected but not reported. In addition to digital activism, vigils were held in several Texas cities, including one in Seabrook where Mary lived. Candles, photos, and handwritten notes were placed in front of her apartment building. Several domestic violence advocacy groups also used the case to push for reforms in protective services. A nonprofit based in Houston published a public report titled, "She Told No One," a case study in missigns, using Mary's case as an example of how emotional manipulation and fear of retaliation prevent victims from seeking help. Public frustration was also directed toward the Department of Corrections, specifically questioning how an inmate like Michael King was able to receive a FaceTime video call using a contraband phone. Many viewers wanted to know how such calls were not being flagged, especially considering the criminal histories involved. In the aftermath of Mary Jayne Collins' murder, several critical questions were raised by journalists, advocacy groups, and the public. These questions centered around system failures and the preventability of the crime. Could the system have protected Mary? There is no clear record of Mary filing any restraining orders or formal complaints against Hearst. However, she was reportedly seen with injuries that could have prompted welfare checks. If medical personnel, daycare workers, or neighbors had reported these signs, protective services might have intervened. Critics argue that the current domestic violence reporting system relies too heavily on the victim's willingness to speak out. In Mary's case, fear or manipulation may have silenced her. Did anyone see this coming? Reports indicate that Hearst's behavior had become increasingly controlling in the weeks leading up to murder. Friends noted that he often limited Mary's communication with outsiders. Still, without a direct threat or formal report, no preemptive action was taken. This raises concerns about the need for proactive monitoring in volatile cohabitation situations, especially involving children. Are prison communications being monitored enough? The FaceTime call between Hearst and Michael King played a key role in Hearst's final psychological attack. It also exposed a serious flaw in prison oversight. King, an inmate already convicted of a serious offense, had access to a mobile device that allowed him to video call his children. This call was not only illegal, it was weaponized. Viewers and advocates have demanded stricter controls, suggesting that all prison communications involving co-parents or ex-partners should be monitored for potential threats. Should a criminal's family members, like Hearst, whose brother was killed, have unsupervised access to the families or children of their enemies? What steps can be taken to prevent revenge-based relationships, especially when there's a criminal history involved? If Mary had confided in someone earlier, would the outcome have been different? How can society create safer channels for women to report abuse without fear of retaliation? Should illegal inmate communication be classified as a public safety threat when it contributes to premeditated violence? If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.